dyslexia and struggled as a young boy to learn to read in Vancouver, Canada in 1972 at Maple Grove Elementary School many years ago, and suffered from my severe dyslexia for many years in school, and barely made it through high school, and tried to get through university and struggled with foreign language requirements, and had to fight the University of British Columbia for a language exemption, and found a way to make it through. And for some reason, to my parents' surprise, I decided to dedicate myself in education. I thought as a little boy I would do anything to stay away from school, but made it my life's journey to try to make a difference for those with learning disabilities. And so my initial work was in the field of dyslexia, did work at the master's degree level at Boston University. I came back to Vancouver and worked at Fraser Academy as an Orton Gillingham tutor, math tutor for several years, and then got into private assessment, conducting psych ed assessments with psychologists, and got really interested in cognitive functioning beyond just that of reading disorders like dyslexia. So I got interested in nonverbal learning disabilities. I got interested in other language-based disabilities, attention deficit issues. So I started to develop a real interest in a broad range of why children and teenagers and adults struggle in learning, and got into the work of All Kinds of Minds, which was sort of a sad situation in terms of Dr. Mel Levine. Dr. Mel Levine had a really good way of explaining cognitive functioning to teachers, and I started working with teacher unions and introducing All Kinds of Minds in the BC Teachers Federation. And then I came across, by chance, because of parents, the work of Barbara Arrowsmith Young about, 25 years ago? Oh my God, a quarter century ago. I'm getting old. I just turned 60. I couldn't believe it. But anyways, I got to learn about her work 25 years ago from parents who had heard of her through a variety of magazines and shows, and some of the anecdotal evidence that she was providing about brain change and neuroplasticity. And throughout my training at university, whether it's master's degree or doctorate degree work, no one ever talked to me about brain change or neuroplasticity. So this was all new to me 25 years ago. I was actually trained at graduate school that the brain was fixed. It was like a computer. You were diagnosed with a learning disability. These cognitive weaknesses stay with you all your life. That awareness has changed dramatically since 25 years ago. But when I was introduced to Barbara's work, I was in the brain fixed mindset. And so I was a bit shocked by what parents were telling me and saying that this woman has this program that improves cognitive functioning. And I was a open-minded skeptic of that concept. But I've always had a curious mind, always curious about what's going on in the world of science. And so these families told me about a school in Toronto, the Arrowsmith School, and I was conducting assessments with these families and said, listen, if you go to Toronto, come back and let me see how your kids do with updated psychoeducational assessments. We'll redo cognitive tests and intellectual tests and achievement tests. And I think roughly 5 families moved from Vancouver, over 25 years ago to try the school out, and they came back, and I conducted the updated assessments. Sandra may have been around back then. Were you around? Yeah. And the results came back on my desk that we had improvements in processing speed, working memory, fluid intelligence, areas of receptive and expressive vocabulary, visual motor integration skills were improving, these are cognitive capacities that usually I had seen remain fixed over like a 3-year period of time, because no one, unless you're speech path or OT, were working on these cognitive functions. So I was stunned, actually. I was one of those aha moments in life where you say, okay, there's a new world I haven't seen before. It's called neuroplasticity. I better pay attention to it. And that's when I phoned Barbara Arrowsmith Young in Toronto and said, I need to see what you're doing. Can I fly to your school in Toronto and learn more about the Arrowsmith program? And this was 2005. And so for the last 20 years, my sort of main focus has been providing the Arrowsmith program here in British Columbia and also in Redmond, Washington, at a school that we have in that location, which was sort of supported by Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, who's a big fan of this work, which is really exciting to have his backing, and his wife, Anu Nadella. And then for as well over the 3 years, I've been writing books about the Arrowsmith program and involved in the research that we're doing at the University of British Columbia, Southern Illinois University, research in Spain with neurologists, sort of third-party neuroscientists who get free will to study the program and give us feedback on what they're seeing, and have that peer-reviewed and published. Is exciting to see that development as well. So, but and then I'm just finishing a book now about 120 families who moved from Australia starting in 2009 to attend our school in Vancouver because there just weren't many services in Australia at the time. And following these kids over 8 to 10 years has been a really exciting journey for me. And my brain is in writing mode right now. So I had to say, Sandra, I got to get out of writing mode. I'm in writing mode. But it's just been, I've been very fortunate to have had this opportunity in my lifetime to work with a neuroplastician, Barbara Arrowsmith Young, and her work, and try to share what I know and what I'm learning about this work to others who may be curious and open-minded like I am about what's out there. Unfortunately, in professional life, we get into our career, we get into how we see things, and it's very hard for some professionals to shift their way of thinking. And so you hit roadblocks, you hit resistance, you hit people who find it hard to shift a mindset or that cognitive flexibility. And I think that's been the hardest thing in my career, is to have professionals who just are struggling with an open mindset and want to look at new things and new ways of understanding the world around them. But again, I don't want to cry poor me. It's just the way it is in this world. But so I'm here to share my knowledge and answer questions that I'm learning about individual children and teenagers and adults, and how we can make a huge difference in their lives. And I could spend hours with you on individual cases that are just fascinating to see, and how we're helping them improve their quality of life. Because I think ultimately that's our goal, is improve quality of life for individuals. You're rapidly taking notes, maybe. Yeah. So, I think a lot of you know. How many here know about the Arrowsmith program at some level? Like, have you heard about the Arrowsmith? Okay. I don't know, Serena, if she's heard about the program.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, I don't want to repeat what you might know already.
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. From what I've read on the websites and the studies, it's for all the studies are on children who have learning disabilities. But does it kind of help somebody with a low IQ?
Yeah.
Just a low IQ?
Yeah, it's really interesting you said that. The chapter I've just been writing about is a boy named Michael, who came from Sydney, Australia. And the chapter is called, be careful with how you judge IQ and potential, because a lot of psychologists will conduct an IQ test and tell a parent, okay, the boy's verbal IQ is borderline, but their visual perceptual is low average, but the full scale is really low. And parents hear the word borderline and they go into terrified mode. And they think, okay, this is fixed. There's no way to change an intelligence measure. And this is just far from the truth. I've seen borderline measures change to average intellectual capacity, but you have to have the right cognitive intervention to do that, right? It's not going to happen if you just try to integrate the child in a school district. You actually have to provide the intensive, repetitive cognitive program to build these neurological functions that are measured on an IQ test. So Michael, for example, he was tested at the 2nd percentile in verbal IQ on the WIPSI, which quite low. And by the time he had finished the Arrowsmith program 4 years, he was in our program for 4 years. His IQ was 100 in the verbal IQ subscale, and his visual IQ had gone up more than it was before. And so the question is, how is that possible? How do you build cognitive functions so it impacts IQ scores? And so, the Arrowsmith program has 19 different cognitive functions that it isolates and targets, and builds on increments of complexity. So you might start with just auditory discrimination capacities. You might start on memory for words and ability to hold words in your mind. You then may move to reasoning capacities, which helps you try to compare and contrast two ideas or concepts at a time, which helps with ability to compare how words are the same or alike, like on the similarity subtest of the WISC, for example. So over a period of time, the child then begins to build vocabulary ability because their auditory discrimination is better, their word memory is better, their ability to see cause and effect are better in terms of linguistic cause and effect. And so, this isn't, this boy took 4 years to alter his intellectual capacity, but he did it. And I think that's what we're able to see. And that's what we're privileged to be able to see. And this is another thing altogether is, the parents who came to Australia are very privileged families. They're wealthy, right? They could afford $100,000 of travel and tuition to come to Vancouver. They feel both humbled that they had this opportunity, but also dreadfully guilty that they could give their child the chance. And so many of their neighbors, kids at schools that they had left were struggling still when they got back because their learning differences were so severe. And I think, but I said to these families, we need to tell these stories because, this is what's possible if we put the money into public education and cognitive training for children, that we can actually provide so much more than we're currently giving. And what these families have shown is that if we invest in a child's mind cognitively, the outcomes for their wellness and sense of happiness and their abilities to look at career options or just expand tremendously if we do that. So yes, the measures of intelligence are highly alterable. I know the visual perceptual scores, block design, and measures of picture arrangement, all those things really depend on things like visual discrimination and object memory capabilities, which are a struggle for some children. And you can train object memory. You can train visual discrimination, but we have to remember it's not an overnight thing. It's not 1 hour a day 1 hour a week for 6 months. It takes a lot of repetition and practice to build capacity. And so it's not an overnight thing. And this is another really remarkable thing about the Arrowsmith program is the children are really committed, and teenagers or adults who do it are really committed to improving their own brain function. And that's hard to do consistently every day. And it's, you have to have the right cognitive teacher, the right teachers, the right motivation, the right inspiration to get someone to be able to commit to that level of cognitive transformation. But we've seen it, and it's just wonderful to observe and be part of.
And is your school, is it different from the one in Toronto?
No, it's almost the exact image. When I said it to Barbara 20 years ago, I want to start an Arrowsmith school. I said, I need to visit yours in Toronto and see what it looks like. And I pretty much took a notepad and copied every classroom around and how the desks were positioned and computers were positioned, and said, I'm just going to do exactly what you're doing. We've changed it a bit in that we now have an option. Mostly we're seeing that we can do a lot with 1 or 2 cognitive exercises in terms of brain change. So we've added a bit more curriculum. So we do 4 blocks of cognitive work out of 8 a day, and then 4 curriculum blocks. So math, English, science, STEM. We have art, and we have music. So we've tried to be a bit more holistic to bring more sort of variation into a child's day versus 75% of the day, which used to be just cognitive, which was quite a load for kids, which is what Barbara was doing in Toronto. So now we have 4, like half the day is cognitive intervention. What's interesting too is, I was saying to Sandra that in looking at the case studies and some of the profiles, you can have just one of Barbara's 19 cognitive weaknesses, and it can put a stop on your educational progress. Where there's another child who has 11 of the 19, and it's just as problematic for them. So it really doesn't matter how many cognitive weaknesses you have. It's really which one and how severe is it for their difficulty academically. And what's great with the Arrowsmith assessment, you can determine that after the assessment is conducted. You see how many of the areas are difficult for a child or a young adult or adult, and then how long the program is going to take to get through for them to move forward. Yeah, well, one of the other things, I'm just going to throw things at you because I've just been discovering these things recently, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm still discovering things with the Arrowsmith program.
Howard,
So
just to say, sorry, Estrelita, did you have a question? I saw your hand there for a minute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no worries. Hi, Howard.
Yes.
To meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I just have a question about trauma-based. Do you have experience with trauma-based studies, how trauma affects a child's, say, for example, before the trauma, maybe the brain function or neuroplasticity was different, and after the trauma it changed. Do you have any experience working with kids who had early childhood trauma, who ended up having difficulty like learning disability or somewhere along those lines, maybe?
Yeah, I think, well, in general, every child who's struggling in school is experiencing trauma or has had trauma because of the level of stress and anxiety created by not understanding what's going on in their world, in their classroom. One of the key things that I've seen in learning difficulties is many of these kids struggle with certainty, like trying to understand, when I wake up, this is what's going to happen. I have a prediction that I can believe in that will take place, and there's a pattern. And many individuals with learning differences, because of their cognitive weaknesses, struggle with certainty, and therefore they're often traumatized because what they expect doesn't happen, whether it's socially with their peers or with their friends. Of course, there can be trauma at home with parents and relationships. There can be abuse, physical or sexual abuse trauma. All those things impact large-scale brain network connectivity, or ability for a brain to make sense of the world around us. Right? It can shut it down. It can slow our connectivity down. It can make our connectivity hyperactive. What we have in our brain is these, sort of wires or wiring that connect different lobes and regions to each other. And trauma will alter those large-scale brain networks. When we look at learning disabilities or learning differences, and we say, how are those large-scale brain networks? Guess what? The same. They have poor connectivity, either hypo or hyper, just like in trauma, which is very interesting. But one of the things we know that with our kids that come to our school, they've been traumatized, whether it's learning in a classroom or with peers socially or some other situation. And so it's really important to try to create a mindful, safe environment in their classroom immediately. And what's nice about the Arrowsmith program is that the kids are doing cognitive exercises that are at their level of what we call zone of proximal development, a Vygotsky term, where they're able to actually do the work without someone actually telling them how to do the work. So there's a level of independence. There's a level of internal locus of control. I can do this. There's also a lack of worry that I'm going to be embarrassed by someone because they're going to see that I can't do this. So we try to bring in mindfulness practice. We try to bring in the growth mindset. We give them cognitive exercises that they can engage in successfully without fear of trauma, and try to, over time, what we're seeing in the neuroscience research, we're actually redesigning these large-scale brain networks to show average connectivity. And so when we do a pre-measure in a functional MRI of these kids doing one of our cognitive exercise, they could show hyperconnectivity. Their brain is working really hard to try to figure out what's happening. And then over time, usually after 3 months to 6 months, we see connectivity in these large-scale brain networks return to normal or average functioning. And this is the sign that we see where there's an important shift in mindset, in ability to feel a sense of certainty in the world around you. We see the large-scale network issues in ADHD. If you do the research there, you'll find that children and adults with ADHD have large-scale brain network connectivity problems. It's in autism without intellectual disability, high-functioning autism. It's also in various other learning disabilities. It's in brain injury. If you look at brain injury and large-scale brain network connectivity, you'll see hyperconnectivity there as well. And I think one of the brilliant things that I've seen come out of the functional MRI studies from the Arrowsmith program is the return of average connectivity in these subjects, which shows that the brain is calming down. It's using brain regions properly. It's not overusing neurological areas, and it's developing an easier way to understand the world around them.
Thank you. Just one more question, if it's allowed, if there's enough time.
Yeah.
So the other day I happened to be at my son's school. He also has type 1 diabetes. And I just had this, I don't know what one calls it. It's not the right environment for him. Mm-hmm. The classroom, the chaos. I don't know how, with knowing my son, he's 10 years old, I don't even know how I would learn. Well, maybe I also have some neuroplasticity help that I need. But it's not the right environment for him. He is not learning.
Yeah.
He is very smart, but he's not learning. He's not willing to participate. He's not willing to, not because he's a difficult kid. I think he doesn't have confidence because he's been told so many times, unfortunately, by teachers or EAs, their body language, just negative and not, yes.
Yeah,
So,
one of the things that I've learned over the 25 years researching cognition and Barbara's work as well, and Luria, is that there's so much to understand about how a child is perceiving the world around them, and without us putting judgment on what we think they're doing. And I'll give you an example that there's two boys in the new book I'm writing, Oliver and Michael, and they had pretty good spelling. Like, they started to learn to spell and to do math calculations. Their issue was social, and trying to understand the social world around them and make sense of other people's feelings and other people's belief systems, and taking on another person's perspective in the world. And this is called theory of mind. Very interesting research. For example, we started seeing, when you test these kids, if you show them a picture of kids interacting, like a visual image of a game, and ask them to describe what's happening, they'll look at it and they will not be able to see that child will have a perspective. They'll just put their perspective on it. And so they can't take perspective taking. They can't reflect on how someone else is feeling. And they also struggle with just visual imagery. They struggle with visual memory for objects and things like that. So here's a boy, here's two kids sitting in the grade 1 classroom. Their vocabulary is fine. They have good vocabulary. They have, receptive, expressive language skills, but they can't make sense of the social world that they're observing. They're distracted because of it. They're diagnosed with ADHD because of it. One was diagnosed, defiant disorder, OCD, conduct disorder. One was diagnosed with autism because he was disengaged. But the fact was, they didn't have the cognition to actually make sense of the world that they were observing. And they needed to have cognitive training to build this capacity. So a lot of these kids have sort of lower emotional IQ. They might grow up to be the Bill Gates, of the world, or Elon Musk of the world. But they just can't see another person's perspective. But what's amazing is that you can train it. You can train this capacity, which is what the Arrowsmith program does. It has an exercise called nonverbal thinking, which essentially is looking at visual images of social scenes and using language to interpret them. And for some kids, Sandra, you were a cognitive teacher, it took a long time to get them to take on someone else's perspective in the image. They just wanted to list facts of what they've seen. Oh, there's a car, there's a road, there's a ball, but they're not able to look at a person and say, oh, that person feels this about that other person, right? This is that perspective taking. And then over a period of, with these two boys from Australia, over a period of 2 years, we worked on this exercise 5 days a week, 40 minutes a day, using perspective taking language or theory of mind language to build this capacity. And the parents and the kids who are now in their 20s say the biggest benefit they got from the Arrowsmith program was their change in emotional intelligence and the ability to see what others are feeling and thinking. But think about that in terms of curriculum. What happens in grade 4 in English and literature? You got to start taking perspectives of people, right? Or social studies. So this isn't just a social skill issue. This is an academic skill issue. But going back to your question too, I was just reading an article where there are more and more, I think it's in Britain, where parents are hiring an aide just to sit with their kid in a classroom all day to keep them comfortable, to interpret what's happening for them in the classroom, to keep them at ease and reduce their anxieties. You're seeing more and more of these types of aids. And I think this is all related to some of the cognitive frustrations these kids are having, where they just can't interpret. So if you have these issues, like I was talking to you about, imagine anxiety disorders, right? That and how they rise if you have trouble interpreting, the individuals in your kids in your classroom. So you're having this increase in anxiety as well. The question is, why am I seeing more of these cases? And I don't know if it's screen time or lack of play that kids have with each other, but I'm seeing more of these types of cases where we're really seeing a struggle with the emotional intelligence and ability to perceive those of others. And certainly kids with learning disabilities or differences have a high rate of social communication problems. And certainly with ADHD, can be social communication issues with impulsivity and perspective taking. And then, of course, those diagnosed with autism without intellectual disability, that's a big part of their profile, social communication. And what I love about the Arrowsmith program, a big component of it is building emotional intelligence. And that's something I haven't seen in any program. I know there's like things that you could do, like group work and with a special agent society or secret agent society. But I think a lot of these things just aren't intensive enough, right? I think what's unique about the Arrowsmith program is its intensity, repetitiveness, and how frequently these kids get exposed to the exercise that needs to alter the brain regions responsible for these abilities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Alex, you have a question?
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on that, Howard, thanks for that explanation. I'm really curious, knowing that a lot of the kids who probably come to your program have had some kinds of classroom experiences that have probably felt traumatic, or like they're aware that they're not keeping up, right? And so I to be honest, looking at your website, I was so amazed with like the 19 areas and all this. And I was also like, gosh, this is intimidating. This is a lot of work. And I'm curious how your staff kind of gets that buy-in and helps these kids build the confidence to participate and attend. Because this is it's so rigorous and right. And it has to be like, that's how we see the neuro changes. But how do you cultivate that buy-in from kids?
Yeah, it's really interesting. In writing this new book, and the Aussies that came into the school back in 2010, 2011, one of the first things that made them feel comfortable and brought their shield down was that they recognized that there were other kids who had the same cognitive struggles, that they were doing these exercises and those kids couldn't do that either. And so that sort of lowered their anxieties and made them feel, okay, I'm not alone in this world of confusion and uncertainty. And these kids are smart and bright, and we can have fun and get along. And, I'm not worried about walking down the street with them. They look normal type thing. I think the other thing is, once students start realizing that it's their own effort that can change their performance, that is sort of life altering for them. That's that internal locus of control, that it isn't my tutor doing it. It's not my mom doing the work. It's not my teacher having to explain it, for the 10th time. I'm actually able to do this on my own. And it was through my own effort that I reached this level of mastery. And that's one of the things, Alex, you see in the program, with the zone of proximal development, there's exercises like, say it's the symbol relations or clocks exercise where they're learning about reasoning or conceptual thinking. You might start with a one-handed clock where they're just trying to read what the hour is. And they're confused because it's between 1 and 2 and they don't know before and after. And, is it 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock? Is it nearer to 2? Is it nearer to 1? And then we add a minute hand, which adds more complexity to it. And then both hands are the same size in a two-handed clock, if you imagine that. And you have to figure out what time it is with both hands the same size in an analog clock. And they're able to, over time, figure this out through cause and effect reasoning. And they start feeling the sense of, oh, you know, I mastered this. I was able to do this on my own. And then they start sort of having this own drive to do, you know, it becomes addictive. They want to get to three-handed clocks, to four-handed clocks, to five-handed clocks. I mean, there are some exercises that aren't as, you know, exciting to reach. But when I talk to students and do case studies, there are certain exercises that, you know, produce more excitement about engaging in, you know, the one with visual imagery and writing stories about what they're seeing, and the clocks exercise. I think there is no question that at some point the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, Alex, and they wish they were back at their other school, right? And when I, you know, again, talking about the book from Australia that I'm writing, a lot of these kids were driven to get back to their friends, right? Like they wanted to get back and go to their old school and see their buddies. So that was a drive for them to do as well as they could, so they could get back into their other school. So Arrowsmith isn't, kids aren't going, oh, I wish I could be here, you know, all my educational experience, right? You know, they're there for a purpose. They're there for, you know, 2, 3, 4 years if they're, you know, very severe, significant issues. And we know we're trying to gear them towards a transition back into public or private school. But, you know, while they're there, they're sensing this growth. They're sensing, I have this ability to alter who I am cognitively and personally. Because it's not only altering them, like, this is an important thing to think about. As you change capacity, your personality changes, right? Like, here's an example. I mean, again, go back to the sense of uncertainty. Many individuals with a variety of these disabilities, whether it's learning disabilities, ADHD, autism without intellectual disability, have this sense of uncertainty and worry. And it creates a personality of panic, anxiety, paranoia, lack of trust in others at times. You might see that in friends who have these issues, or peers who have, or children that have these issues. But as you develop this certainty, as you develop an awareness and ability to process the sensory world faster and make sense of it faster, your personality shifts to confident and gregarious and talkative and risk taker. And those transformations are amazing to see in the kids that we work with. That it might take, you know, till year 2 till we start seeing that. And these are things that parents notice too when they're at home. Oh, they debate me more, or they disagree with me more, or they tell me what to do, or they correct my judgment, you know, which is all so exciting because this is that personality shift that you're seeing. So as you develop capacity, you develop a personality that's different than one you had before. Cognition drives personality. And I wish, you know, people who are in counseling and psychology or psychiatry would understand that a bit more, because many should refer clients to cognitive intervention because it would help in therapy, like tremendously help in therapy. And that's why, you know, I don't know if you read or heard the book, The Brain That Changes Itself by Dr. Norman Doidge. Really good book. Came out 2010, I think, like 15 years ago. He's a psychiatrist in Toronto. And he had heard about Barbara's school, the Arrowsmith School, because Barbara's school is in Toronto. And he had a couple of clients that had inflexible thinking and really struggled with relationships and seeing another person's point of view, like I talked to you about before, you know, perspective taking. And he said, you know, why don't I just send my client to Barbara's school and see, because I'm getting nowhere with my psychoanalyst work. Like I can't help this. I've been with them for 5 years and they still do the same darn stuff with their spouse. You know, they just can't see another perspective. And so he sent her, you know, these clients of his, psychiatric clients, to Barbara, who started working on these cognitive functions. And, within 6 months, because it takes a while, he started seeing the benefit in therapy, that they actually were better at perspective taking. And then he had tried to work on for 5 years, right, through medications and dream therapy, whatever he was working on. But once Barbara was able to tackle the root cause of that difficulty, which is cognitive functioning and the networks that are responsible for social perspective taking, the therapy began to really benefit them. And this is why I think, again, and then of course alter their personality, make them happier, less anxious, those kind of things. So I hope that answers your question, Alex. Yeah.
Similarly, I'm curious typically how you group classrooms, like how many learners are in a classroom? Do we divide by skill level or more by age? How does that all go?
Depends on the size of the school. In Vancouver, before the pandemic, we had like 130 kids at our school at UBC. And we used to group them, like, lower elementary, upper elementary, and then a, grade 9 through 12 classroom. And those were cognitive classes. And then, the academics would split into smaller groups of 4 or 5 kids, grade 9 math, grade 10 math, more individualized. But the cognitive groups could be, because it's all individualized, the cognitive groups could have a wider range of ages. And so, in the Redmond school, there are 2 or 3 groups of kids at different ranges. In Vancouver, it's in one large classroom setting, but it's mostly elementary level. We don't really have high school at the school in Vancouver. And then, of course, online, which grew because of the pandemic. I think we have 130 students online in 22 countries doing the program online, which was the last thing in my mind, that I ever thought would happen. But because it's what we do is we work with, on the online component, kids work 4 hours a week. I think 4 days a week. 4 hours, 4 days a week on one cognitive exercise. And the one that is mostly chosen is the symbol relations exercise, which is the clocks exercise, which we found in the neuroscience research, the most powerful cognitive impact on a wide range of abilities, including reasoning, cause and effect thinking, reading comprehension, math problem solving, scientific thinking, all aspects of executive functioning, planning, organizing, memory. It's quite a remarkable tool. I think Barbara should get a Nobel Prize for that cognitive exercise in particular. It's brilliant. And so we have, these 130 students, so, I think half adults in 22 countries working on this exercise and transforming their lives, just doing this 4 hours a week, 4 days a week, and that's fun. The schools are really beneficial for the kids who really do need a more comprehensive program. They might have the social issues, the reading issues, the listening issues, the executive functioning issues, and that's not a one cognitive exercise reality. That's where you need 4 or 5 of them, at least 2 to 3 years minimum, to start building all the different areas that you need to over time. And if you're trying to reshape intelligence, that's going to take longer because there's a lot involved, a lot of different cognitive functions involved in intelligence. Intelligence is essentially like the WISC and the WIPC and the Stanford Binet. They're just measures of cognition, right? But unfortunately, we want to gather them into one number as if there's this mythical potential. It's just an absolute lie. There just isn't. There's a good book called The Mismeasurement of Man by Stephen Gould about the IQ testing and just how shameful it actually is. And, in Australia, imagine this, like the families at age 4, the kids at age 4, they usually start with a speech therapy assessment, and then they do an OT assessment, and then they do an IQ test. And then the psychologist does the IQ test at age 4 years, 5 months or whatever. And some of these kids are coming out mild disability or borderline disability. And the parents are told this, that your child has a borderline disability and there's not much potential. And that's what they're told. And just from this one score. And fortunately, the parents who came to Australia or to Vancouver, the 120 families, didn't want to believe this, that this was a reality. But I mean, it's also, how they heard about Arrowsmith was all serendipitous in terms of, Norman Dorge's book was published in Australia at that time. So people started reading it. The Sydney Morning News published an article about Barbara. So a lot of these families would never have known about Barbara if it wasn't just chance, in life. And even we've been here 20 years, and there will be people that, live across the street, don't know what we do. It's still not recognized as well as it needs to be. It's still not talked enough. I think we have this, we have this important vigilance on dyslexia and word decoding, and Orton Gillingham and Linda Bell and kids who struggle with reading. Unfortunately, we're missing out on so many other children where it's not about a reading disorder. There's other things going on. And this is where I wish the world would open up, educators would open up their mind beyond just dyslexia. But those with dyslexia, there's going to be a lot of kids with dyslexia that have the issues I've talked about, and they're not being addressed. These other issues don't get addressed. If you have trouble with spelling, definitely do decoding, do phonemic awareness, do sound symbol training. But my guess, if you have dyslexia, you have some of these other issues, most likely, like working memory, executive functioning issues are often part of someone who has dyslexia as well. They don't just operate in isolation. Yes.
What is your opinion on the accuracy of the psychoeducational assessment?
I think it's a snapshot at a time. And you get false positives and false negative scores. You get kids who are tired at different subtests. I used to do them for years. Sandra was involved with that. But there are, I think the cognitive measures can remain quite stable if you don't do cognitive intervention. So if you have trouble with visual motor speed or processing speed on the coding subtest or symbol relation or symbol, one of the other subtests, and you don't work on improving fine motor speed, visual motor speed, that score will remain low, and then that will impact your reading speed, your math fluency speed, and your written output speed. I'll give you, an example. One of the first kids who came from Australia, Daniel, his only issue was slow motor symbol sequencing, meaning he couldn't process symbols quickly, whether they're math or language symbols. But his higher level intelligence, his fluid intelligence, was like 99%. So, like conceptually a genius. But he just couldn't process symbols at a rapid rate of speed. And he hated school because it took him forever to read. It took him forever to do his math. He never had enough time in his tests. He would be failing his tests. And his mom heard about Arrowsmith when he was like 16 years old and sent him across, the ocean to spend a year with us to work on this exercise. And he went back and he was fine. He had, average speed in math, facts and written output improved. It was just this one area. But as a measure of cognition, it showed up as slow, visual motor speed, and it was important. So it was accurate, right? But it wouldn't have changed. That capacity wouldn't have changed unless he did the cognitive exercises to do that. I think psych ed assessments right now are used, unfortunately, for identification, and then accommodations and technology and adaptations are recommended, not cognitive intervention, right? It's still psychologists who do these tests are not looking at, and I think the reason is it's costly, so why bother, write it in there? And schools aren't providing them at a level of complexity like the Arrowsmith program is that would make a difference. This fast forward and CogMed, but those are shotgun approaches. they can make a difference, but they're not as, Arrowsmith program differs from Fast Forward and CogMed in terms of focus, intensity, and isolation of the networks and the cognitive functions. Very different programs. But, because they're not available in the schools, why put them in a psych ed assessment, I guess. But the approach is usually strategic in bypassing the weakness, right? Let's avoid the cognitive weakness. Let's try to emphasize their strengths. It's still the same way that I was involved 25 years ago. And that's sad to me because it's not necessary. We can actually take that weakness and turn it into an average, at least capacity, so they don't have to struggle with it for the rest of their life. And so we still have this, work on your strengths, avoid your weaknesses, compensation mode. But if you're in brain injury, you don't do that anymore. If you have a left hand stroke, you don't say don't use your left hand. You say we're gonna stop your good hand. You're gonna use your bad hand, right? Speech therapy, we don't say, oh, well, that's too bad. You have a speech impediment. We'll just keep your speech impediment. Then work on the speech impediment, right? But for some reason, with these other factors that I've talked about, these other cognitive functions, we just tell kids it's okay. Don't worry about it. Avoid it. You're not going to be a mathematician. You're not going to be a scientist. You're not going to be a poet. You're never going to remember lines of poetry. That's okay. You can be something else. And I think it's so limiting, this mindset, right? It's not what Carol Dweck called the growth mindset, which is how we really should think of kids and their potential. And so I think psych ed assessments, unfortunately, still have a limited sense of potential for children.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left. Just cognizant of everyone's time.
And I got to get back to writing. the publisher wants this in 15 days. No, I really appreciate you listening, and I'm just thankful that you have this desire to learn about what's possible here. And God knows how much time I have on this planet, but the more we can get people to understand what's possible, and you can tell others what's possible, and come visit the school anytime you want to come and visit and watch the kids and talk to the kids. Come down and see. It's a nice little one in False Creek. Is a nice, cute little place. There's a bakery there. You can have a nice latte and watch the kids work on exercises. We always appreciate a guest or two.
And I'll reach out to all of you afterwards, just saying hello. And if you do have any further questions or would like to connect about someone on a more personal level, then happy to arrange that kind of a conversation.
Yeah. And the truth is, you're doing something different. If you choose to do Arrowsmith, you're doing something different than what normal people, what the professionals are often saying to do. You're countering their thinking, and that makes professionals really nervous. And so that's another thing. You have to battle the contrary viewpoints of people who are more in terms of the skeptic. And there's a great mindfulness person. What's his name? Rick Hansen.
Yeah.
And he said one thing. I did a workshop with him once, and he said, negative is like Velcro to the brain, and positive is like Teflon. So if you hear one thing negative, Howard, about Arrowsmith, people will remember that for forever, versus a positive thing, which just bounces off them. And so I try to, find as many positives in the work that we're doing and try to express that. And there's more positives than any kind of negatives, that's happening with the Arrowsmith program. But again, I think more and more research is going to come out, more and more brain science is going to come out. And, I think my dream is that every public elementary school has a cognitive classroom where they're working on these functions. And kids don't have to, have the rest of their life of confusion and uncertainty because they can't make sense of the world around them, which is often the case with these disabilities.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yes, hi, my name is Sam. from New Jersey. Let me ask you, I understand that all these programs and generally these specialized schools are here in place for students that are performing below average to bring them up to average, or to bring them up to perform according to their peers. Is it fair to say that just like we could bring up a student from 10 below to average, can we bring the average student to 10 above? So I mean to say, when we put these cognitive exercises in place, can we literally turn average students into geniuses? They should have superhuman capacity to retain information and
Yes.
like be encyclopedia knowledge and things like that.
In terms of like savant level abilities, I think one of the things I've noticed is that you can take someone who has average capacity and bring them above average. There's no question. One of the exercises Barbara has is that clocks exercise, or what we call symbol relations. And one of the highest levels is 10-handed clocks. And the only people that have been able to understand these clocks are two professionals, an astrophysicist and an electrical engineer could understand this concept. And so some of the students actually work to this 10-handed level of complexity, which is super. It's being able to understand multiple concepts and their relationships almost instantaneously. It's like you got to be super on it conceptually to get it. And students who reach that level, their reading comprehension, the math problem solving, their scientific thinking just skyrockets in terms of academic performance. So there are some exercises within Arrowsmith that can really advance the brain in terms of really high levels of cognitive functioning. Obviously, that's not the Arrowsmith program focus, right? We're not here to build gifted brains. We're trying to build a brain that can cope in the world that their schools require them to cope in, or jobs require them to cope in. But there's certainly levels of mastery in the exercises that are very complex and require a high level of neurological capacity. And those are exciting. When we see students, adults or children reach those levels, we know, oh my God, they're not going to have that much difficulty transitioning into their regular classroom. And in fact, they may need to be challenged in gifted classrooms because they're reached such a high level of abstractness. So again, it's not our focus, but we have seen that.
My question is not so much on the complexity and abstractness. It's more about retaining information. I find that retaining more information is what usually is termed as being more efficient. I mean, at least in the workforce, when you're able to quote and to remember and to compare things to things. So that comparing is already
I think but it comes with that, because what I've seen is that in order to have retention, you need to have really good conceptual thinking. You have to have good memory for information and knowledge. And so there's a lot of brain regions and networks that build that memory capacity, that recall capacity. So, each of these cognitive functions I talk about build this overriding strength and memory retention. However, one of the things I'm finding, I don't know, Sam, but I'm finding that I love, when I write, I sit with ChatGPT right next to me, right? Because it has such knowledge, such insight, such a way to compare things that I can't, even though, I think I'm pretty clever. but I'm finding that, my guess too is technology, like the AI and things like ChatGPT is going to be right next to us. And it's going to help us with that too, and build an ability to get instantaneous information that we just can't, retain because we haven't learned all this stuff in our lifetime. And so that's another thing I'm seeing is AI is another way to expand that capability.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think our hour is up. Thank you, Howard, and thank you everyone for joining. I look forward to remaining in touch.
Maybe we should do this monthly. I love chatting with everybody.
I know it's your favorite thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care, everybody. Good to see you. Thank you.
Good day.
See you soon.